The air smelled like crawfish and spices in the tiny house at the edge of town. Outside, the Mississippi River flowed nearby, bringing with it the sounds and soul of New Orleans. It was in this humble home that a baby boy was born to a young mother who sang lullabies instead of reading bedtime stories. The boy's eyes were bright and curious at first, taking in the colorful world around him. His mama would hold him up to see the sunset, pointing at the reds and oranges bleeding into the sky. "Look at that beauty," she'd whisper. "Remember these colors." But life doesn't always follow the path we expect. When the boy turned 3, a high fever came with an infection that the family couldn't afford to treat properly. The doctor came too late. The fever broke, and the boy lived, but the world went dark. His sight was gone forever. "My baby can't. See?" his mama cried to Grandma, who sat rocking in her creaky chair on the porch. Grandma took a long breath and said, "Child, when God closes one door, he opens another. Your boy's ears will hear what others miss. His hands will feel what others can't touch. His heart will know things that others can never learn." At first, the boy cried for the colors he could no longer see. But soon, he found a different kind of light. Sounds became his rainbow: the rumble of thunder, birds singing in the morning, the tap-tap of rain on the tin roof. One Sunday after church, when the boy was 4, Grandma was cooking dinner while Mama cleaned up. The boy wandered through the house, his small hands feeling along the walls when his fingers found something smooth and cool. The old piano that sat untouched in Grandma's living room seemed to call to him. He climbed onto the bench, his feet dangling above the floor. His tiny fingers pressed down on a key. A note rang out clear and true. Then another, and another. Something stirred inside him. A feeling he couldn't name but couldn't ignore either. The next day he found the piano. Again. This time he tried to play a tune he'd heard on the radio, a simple jazz melody that had been playing that morning. His fingers stumbled at first, but after a few tries, the notes came together. The song took shape. His mama nearly dropped the laundry basket when she heard it. She stood in the doorway watching her blind son play a song he'd heard only once, his head swaying with the rhythm, a smile spreading across his face. "How are you doing that, baby?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The boy shrugged. "I just hear it in my head, Mama. The notes tell me where to go." From that day on, the piano became his world. He would sit for hours, playing songs from the radio, hymns from church, even the jingles from TV commercials. He couldn't read books or see pictures, but he could make music that painted stories in the air. Grandma would invite neighbors over to hear her grandson play. "That boy has a gift straight from heaven," she'd say proudly, as people gathered in her small living room, amazed by what they were hearing. By the time he was 7, word had spread through town about the blind boy, who could play anything after hearing it just once. The pastor invited him to play at church, and the congregation wept as his small hands brought amazing grace to life like they'd never heard before. "How does he know which keys to press?" a visitor once asked his mama. "God guides his fingers," she answered simply. But the truth was more rare and special. The boy had what musicians call perfect pitch. He could identify any note he heard and find it instantly on the piano. It was like he had a map of music in his mind that his fingers could follow without his eyes. Life wasn't easy. Money was always tight. The boy needed special schools and tools for the blind, which cost more than his mama could afford. Some days she worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. But through it all, there was music. As he grew, so did his talent. By 10, he wasn't just playing songs he heard. He was changing them, adding his own style. He mixed the classical pieces his teacher played on tape with the jazz and blues that filled the streets of New Orleans. The result was something new and beautiful that made people stop and listen. Local restaurants began to ask if he could play during dinner hours. They couldn't pay much, but it was something. His mama would walk him there after school, set him up at the piano, and pick him up 3 hours later. The tips people left in the jar beside him helped buy his special books and the medicine he still needed for his eyes. "You're working too hard," his mama told him one night as she counted coins from the tip jar. "It's not work, Mama," he said, with a smile. "When I play, I can see again. In my mind, I see colors when I hear music. Deep blues when I play slow songs, bright yellows for the fast ones, red for the loud parts. It's like the world isn't dark at all." His words brought tears to her eyes, both sad and happy tears. Sad for what he had lost, but happy for what he had found. People in town started calling him the Miracle Boy. Children would gather around the piano to watch his fingers dance across the keys. Adults would shake their heads in wonder, but the boy never thought he was doing anything special. To him, it was as natural as breathing. "You'll play in big concert halls someday," his teacher told him after he mastered a difficult piece in half the time she expected. The boy just nodded. He didn't dream of fame or concert halls. He dreamed of music, endless rivers of notes flowing through his mind, waiting to be set free through his fingertips. And each day, those fingers grew stronger, more skilled, reaching for a future that stretched far beyond the small town where he was born. Years passed like pages turning in a book. Our boy grew taller, his fingers longer, his talent deeper. When he turned 13, something special happened that would change everything. An older woman moved to town. Her hair was silver, and her back was slightly bent, but her hands moved across piano keys like birds in flight. She had once played in big concert halls in Europe, but now she taught music from her little house with the blue door. One Sunday after church, she heard the boy play. She stood in the back of the church, her eyes closed, listening. When the last note faded away, she opened her eyes and saw him, a skinny teenager with dark glasses being led from the piano by his mama. The next day, she knocked on their door. "I heard your son play yesterday," she told his mama. "I'd like to teach him." His mama's face fell. "We can't afford lessons, ma'am." The woman smiled. "I'm not asking for money. I'm asking for the chance to teach someone with a true gift." And so began a new chapter. 3 times a week the boy would go to the house with the blue door. The woman, folks called her Miss Pearl, taught him things he'd never known before. She showed him how to hold his hands just right, how to make the piano whisper or thunder, how to read music with his fingertips using special raised dots called braille. "You've been playing by ear all your life," she told him. "That's a gift. But now I'll teach you to speak the language of music too." He soaked up her lessons like dry earth soaks up rain. She taught him about the great composers, Bach, Beethoven, Chopin, and he played their music with such feeling that sometimes Miss Pearl had to turn away to hide her tears. "Beethoven went deaf, you know," she told him one day. "He couldn't hear his own music, but he felt it in his bones, just like you feel it in yours." The boy nodded. He understood what it meant to create beauty from darkness. Miss Pearl wasn't just teaching him to play. She was teaching him to dream bigger than the small town where he lived. She told him stories about concert halls where thousands of people listened in silence, about grand pianos that cost more than houses, about cities where music filled the streets night and day. "You don't belong just here," she said softly. One afternoon, "you have a gift that deserves to be heard by the world." His mama worried, though. The world outside their town was big and often unkind. What would happen to her boy out there, where people might not see past his dark glasses? But as he grew, his playing grew too. By 16, he was mixing classical pieces with jazz in ways that made Miss Pearl shake her head in wonder. "You're breaking all the rules," she'd say with a laugh, "and it's magnificent." When he turned 17, Miss Pearl told him about a special competition in a nearby city. "The winner gets to go to New York," she said, "to play in a master class with one of the greatest pianists alive." The boy's heart beat faster at the thought. New York, the city he'd heard about in songs and stories where dreams came true and music never stopped. "I don't know," his mama said when he told her. "New York is far away and expensive." "But Mama," he said, "what if this is my chance? What if this is what I'm meant to do?" His grandma, who had grown older and slower but no less wise, put her hand on his mama's shoulder. "Let the boy fly," she said. "His wings are strong enough now." So he entered the competition. Miss Pearl helped him prepare, spending extra hours at the piano, polishing every note until it shone. On the day of the competition, the air in the hall was thick with nerves. 20 young pianists, all with years of training, all with dreams of New York. The boy sat quietly, his hands folded in his lap, while his mama described the scene to him. The gleaming grand piano on stage, the judges with their serious faces, the parents clutching programs and whispering about their children's chances. When his turn came, he walked to the piano with his white cane tapping gently ahead of him. There were whispers as he sat down. He could feel the weight of stares, the silent questions. Then he played. He chose a piece by Chopin, a nocturne that floated like moonlight on water. As his fingers danced across the keys, the whispers stopped. The stares turned to wonder. The questions became answers. When the last note faded, there was silence, then applause that swelled like a wave. The boy smiled, bowing his head slightly, as Miss Pearl had taught him. 3 weeks later, the letter came. His mama's hands shook as she opened it. "You won," she read aloud, her voice cracking. "You've been invited to New York." Miss Pearl cried when they told her. "I knew it," she kept saying. "I always knew it." The next months were a blur of preparation. The whole town seemed to come together to help. The church held a special collection. The restaurant where he sometimes played put out a jar for donations. Even the local bank manager, who'd never shown much interest in music, wrote a check. "This is your moment," Miss Pearl told him as she helped him pack his best clothes. Not many, and not fancy, but clean and pressed. "Remember everything I taught you, but most importantly, remember who you are and where you come from." The night before they left, his grandma called him to her room. She pressed something into his hand, a small, smooth stone. "This was your Grandpa's lucky stone," she said. "He carried it through the war and came home safe. Now it's yours. When you're in that big city feeling small, hold on to it and remember that you carry home with you." The journey to New York was the first time he'd ever left the state. His mama described everything to him: the changing landscape outside, the bus window, the buildings that grew taller as they approached the city, the sea of people rushing in every direction. "It smells different here," he said as they stepped off the bus. "Like concrete and coffee and a million stories all mixed together." Their hotel room was small and the elevator made scary noises, but it was clean and safe. They couldn't afford anything closer to the famous music hall where the master class would be held, so they had to take 2 buses to get there. On the morning of the master class, his mama helped him dress in his best clothes. His hands trembled as he buttoned his shirt. "What if I'm not good enough?" he whispered, speaking aloud the fear that had been growing inside him. His mama knelt in front of him, taking his hands in hers. "Listen to me," she said firmly. "You were born to do this. All those hours at the piano, all those nights you played until your fingers ached. They've led you here. You belong on that stage just as much as anyone else." He nodded, feeling for the lucky stone in his pocket. He was ready. Or at least, he thought he was. What he didn't know was that the world of classical music could be as cruel as it was beautiful. And the man who was about to judge him, the famous pianist from Russia who had played in every great concert hall in the world, didn't believe in fairy tales about blind boys from small towns with perfect pitch and magic in their fingers. The music hall was bigger than any building the boy had ever been in. His footsteps echoed as his mama guided him through the entrance. The air smelled different here, like polished wood, perfume, and something else he couldn't name. Maybe it was the smell of money or of dreams coming true for some and breaking for others. "There's a huge chandelier," his mama whispered, describing everything as they walked. Crystal, hanging from the ceiling like frozen rain, and paintings on the walls of men with serious faces. Composers, I think. The boy nodded, trying to picture it all. His hand squeezed his lucky stone in his pocket. They found the room where the master class would be held. It wasn't the main concert hall, but a smaller room with a grand piano at the front. Still, it was fancy. Fancier than anywhere the boy had ever played before. Young pianists and their families were already there, filling the seats. As his mama led him to an empty chair, he could hear whispers. "Who's that?" Why is he wearing those dark glasses inside? Is he really going to play? His mama's hand tightened around his. Don't mind them, she said softly. You belong here, just as much as anybody. A woman with a clipboard came around checking names. When she got to them, she looked at the boy, then at her list, then back at the boy. You're next after the break, she said, her voice neither kind nor unkind, just busy. Wait by the door until you're called. The first part of the class was just talking. The famous pianist, the Russian master everyone had come to see, spoke about music, about dedication, about sacrifice. His voice was deep, and his English had a thick accent that rolled like stones. Music is not for the weak, he said. It is not a hobby, it is life or death. The boy listened, his heart beating faster. This man didn't sound like Miss Pearl, who said music was joy. He sounded like music was war. During the break, the boy and his mama waited by the door as they'd been told. He could feel people looking at him as they passed by, could hear the whispers. His palms were sweaty. You'll be wonderful, his mama said, straightening his collar. Just play like you do at home. But this wasn't home. The piano would be different. The room would be different. Everything would be different. When the break ended, the clipboard lady came back. You're up, she said, touching his arm. This way. His mama gave his hand one last squeeze. I'll be right here, she promised. I'll be listening to every note. The boy followed the clipboard lady to the front of the room. His white cane tapped. Along the floor, counting steps, finding the way. When they reached the piano, she guided his hand to the bench. Sit, she said. He sat, adjusting himself on the bench, feeling for the pedals with his feet, finding the right distance from the keys. He could feel the silence in the room, heavy as a blanket. And who do we have here? The Russian master's voice came from closer now. He must have been sitting near the piano. The competition winner from Louisiana, the clipboard lady said. Ah, yes. The Russian's voice changed a little, like he'd just remembered something unpleasant. And what? Will you play for us today, young man? The boy swallowed. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, he said, his voice sounding small in the big room. Chopin. The Russian said the name like it was something precious. A bold choice. Let us see if you are worthy of it. The boy took a deep breath. He stretched. His fingers placed them on the keys and began to play. The first notes filled the room, soft as moonlight. He tried to forget where he was, tried to imagine he was back home, playing for Miss Pearl or for his grandma on her porch. His fingers remembered the path they'd traveled 100 times before, finding each note perfectly. For a while, there was only the music. He leaned into it, letting it carry him away from the fancy room, away from the stares and whispers. In his mind, colors bloomed with each chord, blues and silvers like a night sky full of stars. Then it happened. His finger slipped just a tiny bit, hitting a note a fraction of a second too soon. It was a small mistake, one most people wouldn't even notice. But the Russian noticed. Stop. The word cut through the music like a knife. Stop playing now. The boy's hands froze above the keys. The colors in his mind vanished. What was that? The Russian's voice was ice cold. Sir? The boy wasn't sure what to say. That transition. You rushed it. You scrambled the notes like eggs. The Russian's voice was getting louder. Did you even practice this piece? The boy nodded, his throat tight. Yes, sir. I practiced it every day for months. And who taught you to play it this way? This sloppy way? My teacher, miss. Your teacher, the Russian cut him off, should find another profession. Perhaps gardening. Someone in the audience laughed. The boy felt his face get hot. You cannot just play the notes, the Russian continued. A monkey can play notes. You must understand the composer's soul. You must respect the tradition. The boy's hands were shaking now. I'm sorry, sir. I can try again. No. The word was flat, final. I think we have heard enough. You won the competition, yes? Perhaps the other players were all monkeys too. More laughter from more people this time. The boy felt like he was shrinking, getting smaller and smaller. I don't know what the judges were thinking, sending you here, the Russian went on, his voice dripping with disgust. Did they feel sorry for you? Because you cannot see? Music is not charity work, boy, and this, he paused, and the boy imagined him gesturing at the piano, at the music hall, at everything around them. This is not some church basement where people clap because their hearts are kind. The boy sat very still, his hands now in his lap. He could feel tears building behind his dark glasses, but he wouldn't let them fall. Not here. Not now. In Russia, the master continued, we have a saying, not every bird that has wings should fly. Some should stay in their nests. Do you understand what I'm saying, boy? The boy nodded slowly, though he wished he didn't understand. The message was clear enough. You don't belong here. Perhaps you should stick to playing what you know, the Russian said, his voice a little softer now. But somehow that made it worse. Simple songs? Folk tunes? Leave Chopin for those who can honor him properly? The boy heard movement. The Russian must have stood up. That will be all, he said, as if dismissing a servant. Next student, please. But he's only played for a minute, someone protested. The clipboard lady, maybe. The others all got at least 10 minutes. And that was 59 seconds too long, the Russian replied. I don't waste time. Next student. The boy felt a hand on his arm. The clipboard lady again, trying to help him up, to guide him away from the piano. His legs felt wooden as he stood. His cane shook in his hand. As he walked back toward where his mama was waiting, he heard the whispers again. Poor thing. What did he expect? At least he got to meet the master. His face burned with shame. He'd never felt so small, so worthless. All those hours of practice, all those dreams, crushed in less than a minute. When he reached his mama, she took his hand. He could feel that she was shaking too. Let's go, she whispered. Right now. But something kept him from moving toward the door. Some feeling deep in his chest, hot as fire. It wasn't just shame anymore. It was something else. Something that made him stand a little straighter, turn back toward the piano at the front of the room. No, he said. Not yet. Baby, come on, his mama whispered, tugging gently at his arm. Let's just go home. But the boy stood still as stone. Something was happening inside him, like a storm gathering, like a river rising after heavy rain. All his life, people had been kind to him because of what he couldn't do. Now, for the first time, someone was being cruel to him because of what he could do, and that made all the difference. Without saying a word, he turned around. His cane tapped against the polished floor as he made his way back to the front of the room. People were whispering again, louder this time. What's he doing? Is he coming back? Somebody stop him. But nobody stopped him. Maybe they were too surprised, or maybe they were curious to see what would happen next. When he reached the piano, he could hear the Russian master talking to the next student. He interrupted them by simply sitting down on the bench again, his back straight, his chin up. What is this? The Russian's voice was sharp with surprise. You were dismissed, boy. The boy took a deep breath. His hands were still shaking, but not from fear anymore. Sir, he said, his voice clear and steady, I'd like one more chance. There are no second chances in music, the Russian said coldly. Only in fairy tales. Then let me tell you a fairy tale, the boy replied. And before anyone could stop him, his fingers found the keys. But he didn't play Chopin this time. He started with something else. A simple melody his grandma used, to hum while rocking on the porch. A tune as old as the Mississippi River, passed down through generations. Then, like a master chef adding spices to a pot, he began to mix in other flavors. A touch of classical technique from Miss Pearl's lessons. A splash of jazz from the street musicians in New Orleans. A pinch of gospel from Sunday church services. His fingers moved faster now, building the melody into something new. Something that had never been played in this fancy room before. Something that wasn't just from sheet music but from life itself. From sunsets he could no longer see. From rain on a tin roof. From his grandma's cooking and his mama's lullabies. The room grew quiet. Even the Russian stopped trying to interrupt. The boy played on, losing himself in the music. In his mind, colors exploded like fireworks, rich purples and deep blues swirling with fiery reds and golden yellows. He wasn't thinking anymore. He was just feeling, just being. His left hand hammered out a rhythm that made feet want to tap. His right hand flew across the high notes, creating a melody that soared and dipped like birds in flight. Then he brought in elements of the Chopin piece, transforming it, breathing new life into music written over 100 years ago. 5 minutes passed, then 6, 7. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Some people weren't even breathing regularly anymore. In the back of the room, his mama pressed her hands to her mouth, tears running freely down her face now. But these weren't sad tears. These were the kind that come when your heart is too full to hold all its feelings inside. As for the Russian master, he sat perfectly still, his face unreadable. But his eyes never left the boy's hands. When at last the final notes faded away, there was a moment of complete silence. The kind of silence that happens after something changes forever. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the room, someone started to clap. Another person joined in, and another. Soon the whole room was filled with applause. Not polite, respectful applause, but wild, standing up, can't help yourself applause. The boy sat there, his hands resting lightly on the keys. He was breathing hard like he'd run a race. Sweat dampened his collar, but a small smile played at the corners of his mouth. The Russian was the last to applaud. When he finally did, the sound of his large hands coming together cut through the noise like thunder through rain. The clapping went on for so long that the clipboard lady had to step in and quiet everyone down. When the room was finally silent, again the Russian spoke. His voice was different now, softer, almost humble. "Young man," he said, "may I ask your name again?" The boy turned his face toward the voice. "You never asked it the first time, sir." A few nervous laughs scattered through the room. The Russian cleared his throat. "You are right. I did not. I have been." He paused, searching for the right word. "Discourteous, please tell me your name," the boy told him. "Thank you," the Russian said, and it sounded like he meant it. "In 40 years of teaching, I have never—" He stopped again, shook his head. "What you just played, what was it?" The boy shrugged slightly. "Just music, sir." "No." The Russian's voice was firm. "That was not just music. That was revolution." He stood up and walked to the piano. Up close, he wasn't as tall as he had seemed from a distance. His shoulders were slightly stooped, as if bearing the weight of all the music he had carried through his life. "You broke every rule," he said quietly, so only the boy could hear. "You mixed styles that should never be mixed. You changed tempos without warning. You improvised where the notes are sacred." The boy waited for more criticism, but instead the Russian continued. "And yet somehow you made me hear Chopin as if for the first time, as if he were alive, sitting in this room with us." He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I must ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Where did you learn to play like that?" The boy thought about Miss Pearl, about his grandma, about the radio he listened to late at night when everyone else was sleeping, about the sounds of his town, the boats on the river, the birds in the trees, the voices raised in song on Sunday mornings. "Everywhere, sir," he answered. "I learned it everywhere." The Russian was quiet for a moment. Then he said something unexpected. "I must apologize to you." The boy's eyebrows rose above his dark glasses. "I judged you before I truly heard you," the Russian continued. "I saw your cane, your glasses, your simple clothes, and I decided who you were. That was wrong of me. Unforgivable for a musician. We, above all others, should know that what matters is not what we see but what we hear." The boy didn't know what to say to that. So he just nodded. The Russian turned to face the room full of people who were watching this exchange with wide eyes and open mouths. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, we have witnessed something rare today. Something precious. He looked back at the boy. Young man, you came here to learn from me. But today, I have learned from you. You have reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place. Not because it follows rules, but because it breaks them. Not because it is perfect, but because it is true. More applause filled the room, along with a few sniffles from people who were trying not to cry. The Russian held up his hands for quiet. This masterclass will continue, he said. But first I would like to make an announcement. This fall I am starting a special program at the conservatory. A program for musicians who have something new to say, who have voices that deserve to be heard by the world. And I would like to offer the first scholarship to this young man. The boy's mouth fell open. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Of course, the Russian added with a small smile. I will have to retrain you completely. Your technique is still atrocious. A wave of laughter swept through the room, but it was warm laughter, not cruel. From the back of the room, the boy's mama pressed her hands to her heart. This wasn't part of their plan. They were supposed to go to New York, attend the master class, and then go home. Back to their small town. Back to normal life. But maybe, she thought, as she watched her son nod his acceptance of the Russian's offer, maybe normal life wasn't what he was meant for, after all. Part 5. The World Stage. Life changed fast after that day in New York. The boy and his mama went home to Louisiana, but they didn't stay long. Letters came, then phone calls. The Russian master wasn't just offering empty words. He really wanted the boy in his special program. But how will we afford it? His mama worried, sitting at their small kitchen table counting the money they had saved. New York is expensive, and you'll need special books, proper clothes. I can work, the boy said. I can play in restaurants like I do here. His grandma, listening from her rocking chair, spoke up. This family has never turned down a blessing because we were scared, she said firmly. We'll find a way. And they did. The whole town came together again, this time for a proper send-off. The church held a benefit concert where the boy played for 3 hours straight. People who'd never had much money somehow found extra to give. Miss Pearl sold her finest piano, the one she'd brought all the way from Europe years ago. I'm too old for it now, she told the boy when he protested. These fingers aren't what they used to be. But yours are just beginning their journey. 2 months later, they moved to New York. The Russian had found them a small apartment, not far from the conservatory. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and safe. With enough room for a used piano, the Russian helped them find. The training was harder than anything the boy had ever done. The Russian was kinder now, but no less demanding. Again, he would say, after the boy played a piece. Again, but this time, feel it here. He would tap his chest right over his heart. Some days were wonderful. The boy would learn new pieces that made his soul sing. Other days were terrible. His fingers would stumble, his memory would fail, and he'd wonder if he really belonged in this world of classical music. I miss home, he told his mama one night when homesickness hit him hard. I know, baby, she said, stroking his hair. But sometimes the road to where you're meant to be leads away from where you began. Slowly, the boy began to find his place. The other students, who had seemed so different at first with their fancy upbringings and years of formal training, turned out to be just people too, with their own fears, their own dreams. Some became his friends, helping him navigate the big city, describing things he couldn't see, sharing their music with him. The boy still played his own way sometimes, mixing styles, breaking rules. But now he also learned the proper ways, the traditions. He learned when to follow the rules and when to break them. And the Russian encouraged both. First, you must know the rules perfectly, he would say. Then you can break them beautifully. After a year of intense study, the Russian told the boy he was ready for his first real concert. Not a student recital, but a proper performance in the conservatory's small concert hall. Will people come? The boy asked. Will anyone want to hear me play? The Russian laughed. My boy, you don't know. There are already no tickets left. People have been talking about you since that day in the master class. The boy who silenced the great Russian bear. That's what they call me now. You know, the bear. The night of the concert arrived. Backstage, the boy could hear the murmur of the audience through the curtain. His hands were cold with nerves. His mama helped him straighten his new suit, the first real suit he'd ever owned. "Your grandma would be so proud," she said, her voice catching. The old woman had passed away just a month before, too soon to see this moment. "She's watching," the boy said, touching the lucky stone that he still carried in his pocket. "I know she is." The Russian appeared, his heavy footsteps familiar now after countless lessons. "It's time," he said. "Are you ready?" The boy nodded, though his heart was hammering in his chest. "Remember," the Russian said, "tonight you will make many people happy. That is a gift not everyone gets to give." The boy walked onto the stage, his cane tapping lightly to guide him to the piano. The applause that greeted him was warm, welcoming. He bowed as the Russian had taught him, then sat at the bench, finding his place, adjusting his position. For a moment he simply breathed, letting his fingers hover above the keys. Then he began to play. He started with Bach. Precise, mathematical, perfect. He moved to Beethoven. Passionate, stormy, powerful. Then Chopin, the same nocturne. He'd tried to play that day at the master class, but now filled with confidence and nuance. Finally, he played his own composition, a piece that told his story. It began with simple notes like the ones he'd first played on his grandma's piano. It grew more complex, weaving in threads of his journey, the pain of losing his sight, the joy of finding music, the struggle against doubt, the triumph of being heard. When the last note faded, there was that moment of silence he'd come to treasure, the space between music and response when the world holds its breath. Then came the applause, rising like a tide washing over him. He stood, bowed, smiling toward the sound. As he left the stage, he felt the Russian's hand on his shoulder, guiding him. That, the Russian said, was only the beginning. He was right. Over the next few years, the boy's life became a whirlwind. He played in bigger and bigger halls. His first album, a mix of classical pieces and his own compositions, won awards. People who had never cared about classical music found themselves moved by his playing. At 20, he returned to his hometown for a special concert. They held it in the high school gymnasium, the biggest space available. Everyone came, from the bank manager to the waitresses at the diner where he used to play. Miss Pearl sat in the front row, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "You brought something back to us," the mayor told him afterward. "Something even bigger than what you took away." When he was 22, he started a foundation for children with disabilities who wanted to study music. "Not everyone can see with their eyes," he would tell them, "but everyone can see with their heart." He never forgot where he came from. In interviews, he always mentioned his small town, his grandma's old piano, his mama's unwavering belief in him. He talked about Miss Pearl and her patient teaching, about the community that had come together to help him twice. "I'm not special," he would say. "I just had special people who believed in me." The Russian, who remained his teacher and friend, disagreed. "You are special," he insisted. "But what makes you special isn't your talent or your disability. It's your courage. The courage to sit back down at that piano when I told you to leave." Many years later, when the boy, now a man with gray in his hair, received the highest honor his country could give a musician, he was asked how a blind person could create such vivid music. He smiled. "When I play," he said, "I'm not blind. I see colors brighter than any eye could see. I see the world not as it looks, but as it feels, as it sounds, as it truly is beneath the surface." His hands, older now but still strong, still nimble, moved as if finding keys only he could see. "We're all blind in some ways," he continued. "We miss what's right in front of us. We judge books by covers, people by appearances. Music taught me to look deeper, to listen for the truth behind the noise." He paused, then added softly, "And the truth is, The most beautiful things in this world aren't things we see with our eyes. They're things we feel with our hearts. Back in a small town outside New Orleans, in the church where a little boy once played his first notes, there now stands a beautiful grand piano with a small plaque. It doesn't bear his name. He insisted on that. Instead, it simply reads, "For the next child who needs to be heard." Because sometimes the most important gift we can give another person is the courage to keep playing, even when the world tells them to stop.